when you hear that music, you know who's on the show today. We've got Mike Guardia joining us again. Mike is a U.S. Army veteran. He's a military historian and award-winning author, and he is joining us to talk about his latest book. It's called Wings of Fire, A Combat History of the F-15. So welcome, everyone, to Big Blend Radio's Way Back When Military History Show. We're your hosts, Nancy Reed and Lisa Smith, the mother-daughter travel team on the Love Your Parks Tour and publishers of Big Blend Radio and TV Magazine and Parks and Travel Magazine. You can check it all out at bigblendmagazines.com. So welcome back, Military Mike. How are you doing?
I am doing great, Lisa, and it is always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, awesome. We are in military town, Mike. Nancy and I are literally on, at the back of, we're here in 29 Palms, the military base. We've got the Marine base here. It's one of the largest, I think, in the country. And I love the fact that we're talking about Wings of Fire here, because if you go out right now at sunrise, you will literally see Wings of Fire. Like, it just, because the sunrises, you know about the desert, right? Those amazing sunrises you get. But then you see all these skylines all over the place out here. So the Marines are busy. So I wanted to ask, first thing, has the F-15 been to 29 Palms, do you think?
It's probably flown over 29 Palms quite a few times. You have quite a lot of Air Force bases that are just across the border in Nevada, not the least of which is Nellis Air Force Base, which sees a lot of traffic. And, I know that they do a lot of their aerial maneuvers over the Mojave Desert.
And then what about Edwards Air Force Base? That too, right? That's not too far from here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's not too far. And I want to remind everyone, too, about all these books you've written. You've got Hal Moore, A Soldier Once and Always, American Guerrilla, The Forgotten Heroics of Russell W. Volkman, Shadow Commander, The Epic Story of Donald D. Blackburn, The Fires of Babylon, Eagle Troop, and the Battle of 73 Easting, Hal Moore on Leadership, Winning When Outgunned and Outnumbered, Crusader, General Don Starry, An Army of His Time, Hal Moore, A Life in Pictures. And also we talked about Tomcat Fury, A Combat History of the F-14, the last couple of books that you've done, and American Armor in the Pacific. I know there's more, right? You've got this pile growing of all these books. But it's interesting. You're digging into the, you did Tomcat Fury, and now we've got Wings of Fire. So the F-14 and the F-15, are they related?
Absolutely. They sure are. They actually grew out of the same time period, and they both grew out of the same needs that the Department of Defense had in the early 1970s to find something that could counter the MiG-25.
Okay, so this was because of the Russians, right?
Absolutely, sure was.
So they were allies, and then they become not allies.
Yeah, kind of a sad story. They were one of our closest allies. I mean, we never fully trusted the communists, and in many ways, rightfully so. But because we had a common enemy in Hitler, we got along swimmingly during World War II. But within a span of just a few years after the war ended, they were now our mortal enemies, and the standoff between us and the communist world, was really the defining part of American foreign policy for so long. And we found ourselves at every turn trying to stay one step ahead of the Russians and the Warsaw Pact. And you really saw this a lot in the development of our military aviation. And right around the tail end of the Vietnam War was when we took a step back and we said, okay, the war in Vietnam, among many other things, has really put us about a generation behind what the Soviets have out. So we need to play a great game of catch-up, particularly with regards to the Air Force and with regards to naval aviation. So long story short, what happened was you had some naval air planners and then you had some Air Force planners who got together and said, okay, we are the Navy, and what we want is this F-14 Tomcat, which is going to be a carrier-based plane that's going to protect the mother fleet. And then on the other side of the fence, you have the Air Force that says, okay, well, we want an air superiority fighter with a long endurance that can take on any Soviet MiG. And boom, now we have the F-15 Eagle. So the Navy has the F-14 and the Air Force has the F-15. Wow. And then by the mid-1970s, both of those planes are the primary fighters that the U.S. has.
Wow. And the F-15 looks like it's got like a little needle nose, man. It's like it looks like a wasp. Like it could sting you really bad. You know what I mean? It's like it's slick. It really is.
It is. It is. Very, very slick fighter. And we actually discovered, and here's a little bit of humorous irony to the story, is we actually discovered that we had over-prepared and we had overestimated a lot of things that the Russians were doing. Because the thing that really spurred the development of the F-15 and the F-14, for that matter, was the debut of this mysterious fighter called the MiG-25. And by all accounts, everybody in the West, I mean, every intelligence analyst was pretty much saying the same thing. They said, oh, my God, this new thing called the MiG-25, it's the biggest and baddest kid on the block. It can fly faster. It can fly higher than anything that NATO has. Oh, my God, what are we going to do to counter this? I mean, that really put the research and development into overdrive. And even when we finally got the F-14 and F-15 online, we were still wondering, well, gosh, I mean, this is the best we can do, but can it really counter the MiG-25? Well, in the summer of 1976, surprise, surprise, you have a Soviet pilot who decides he wants to defect to the West. And his name was Viktor Belenko. He jumps in the cockpit of his MiG-25 and says, okay, goodbye, Russia. I have had enough of communism. And he flies his MiG-25 to Japan, lands on the Hokkaido airfield, and he pops open the canopy and says, okay, here I am. I am renouncing my Soviet citizenship. Please take me to the American embassy. And we saw this as an incredible boon, and the Japanese and U.S. authorities both descended on the MiG, and they whisked it away to a secure location where they could start deconstructing it. And the big surprise came within about a week of their analysis, because they found out that the MiG-25 was garbage. I mean, for lack of a better term, it really was not anything like they thought it would be. You know, it was a poorly constructed death trap, and the only thing that it could do was go fast. But I mean, all of the interior craftsmanship was shoddy. It was a very poorly engineered plane, and they could actually tell just by studying the avionics, and they could tell by the wing designs that, hey, you know, if this thing were put in combat as a dogfighter, it would get crushed. And that's when they also found out a few years later that the particular MiG-25 that the Soviets had put on display and touted as, you know, oh, hey, this can fly to an altitude that was heretofore deemed unreachable by any fighter, and it can fly at speeds in excess of Mach 3. There was only one MiG-25 that could actually do that, and that was a special demonstrator model that they had built specifically for that demonstration. Every series production MiG-25 was about 50% less quality, and these planes never could have functioned in combat.
Wow. So was this like a big publicity stunt to scare the United States?
Which backfired, literally. You know?
Yeah, well,
think about that.
Well, and actually what we found out as the Cold War was drawing to a close was that the Russians had put a lot of equipment out there, but the quality of their equipment was few and far between. You had a few MiGs and maybe a few Sukhois that could hold their own against Western fighters, but by and large, almost everything they put out, whether it was a tank or airplane, you really, like, once all the information barriers had been taken down after the Cold War ended, they found out that a lot of these machines look good on paper, but in combat they fared so poorly.
That's interesting. You know, you think about, you know, it's like even how it got created, you know, just like, oh, we see this, now we need to do something better. It's like, I would think that you would kind of hide what you had. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I've got this new, you know, fighter jet. I'm going to hide it from you until, like, surprise, here I am, ba-boom. You know what I mean? It's like, so it kind of backfired, which is interesting. But so now this kind of takes on, you know, it replaced the F-14, right? So this kind of says, okay, this is the newer one out. It was interesting because, you know, going through your book, you were talking about, okay, it went all over the place, and it kind of goes right up to current times, this plane, or I should say fighter jet, right? That's what the F stands for, fighter jet. I got to make sure here, you know. Okay. But so this goes all the way up to even, you know, 9/11 times.
Sure does, and it is still in service to this day.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. You know, so when you look at it too, when it goes out, it's like, okay, here's a new thing. Here's our new, you know, F-15. Did other countries? Because remember we were talking about on the F-14 how other countries wanted it and went back and forth, right? Did that happen with this one, where other countries wanted
Absolutely,
it or used it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the F-15 has actually had its most illustrious combat service in the Israeli Air Force, and the Israelis actually have some pretty good bragging rights because they were the first ones to actually shoot down an enemy plane in the F-15.
Yeah.
Wow. Who knew?
Yeah. Yes. Yep. So if we wind the clocks back to 1979, this was when the conflicts with Lebanon and Syria were really starting to reach critical mass, and the Israelis had made very good use of the F-4 Phantom during the Yom Kippur War, and also during many of their earlier skirmishes against the Arabs. But they knew pretty much as well as we did that the F-4 was rapidly growing obsolete, you know, particularly in the face of all of these new MiGs and Sukhois that were coming online. So throughout the mid-'70s, the Israelis solicited the U.S. government for the brand new F-15. And the first deliveries, I want to say, happened in 1976. And if you fast forward to 1979, where you know, the war with Lebanon starts to take off. They have their baptism by fire against the Syrian MiGs, and the F-15 makes very short order of these rickety old MiG-21s, and the Israelis are making headlines around the world saying, "Hey, this is the first time the American F-15 has been used in combat, and the pilots were Israelis." And the geopolitical irony, I don't think, was lost on anyone because now everyone was seeing full force, hey, this is how the new generation of American aircraft are faring against their Soviet counterparts. Wow,
and you think about this long career of this one fighter jet, you know, that's I mean, you're saying it's still going today. I mean, we're talking over 50 years. You know, that's amazing, or about 50 years. You know, and you think about the Israeli, you know, military. I remember in South Africa how they kind of paired up with the South African Army and military forces, like the different branches of the armed forces. And I'm just going to say badass. I'm sorry, but that's what I remember. Like if I heard about anybody, in the military and the Israelis, that was the term that was used. So it's interesting to see them, you know, work with this. Part of your book, you talk about, and it's kind of more fast forward into it though, ceasefires, and not ceasefires, but when you kind of close the skies off, right? It's not necessarily a ceasefire, but it's kind of like, okay, we're not, and no-fly zones, and you hear about this on the news all the time with what's going on. So that means like, okay, really, does that mean both sides are going to say, okay, we're going to behave, you can't go here, this is like that? What is the process of that? Because I've never quite understood. Is it a ceasefire but just in the sky?
Okay. Well, it really depends on the nature of the conflict. If you hear the word no-fly zone, it's going to differ slightly depending on what context you're using it in. Now, after the end of the Gulf War, what we did was we actually imposed two no-fly zones over Iraq. One was over northern Iraq, and the other one was over southern Iraq. So the no-fly zone in that context meant that the Iraqis could not fly any of their aircraft over the no-fly zones, and you had NATO aircraft that were patrolling the no-fly zones, making sure that no Iraqi aircraft went up. So in that context, that's what the no-fly zone meant. Now, you have other conflicts where both combatants, both sides of the conflict will agree to enforce a no-fly zone over a particular strip of land, and that means nobody on either side will go up. You know, the only planes that might be permitted to fly there would be like charter flights or, you know, just any airplane of a non-military nature. So, yeah, it really depends on what the context of the conflict is.
And do people ever say, well, we're not listening to that, we're going to sneak off and do that anyway?
Oh, sure. And,
yeah. Just kind of bring that
fact,
up. I mean,
that's funny.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, that is what the Iraqis did on multiple occasions after we set the no-fly zones in place, because all throughout the 90s, and I even remember hearing about this when I was growing up back then, you know, you would hear these one-off news reports of an Iraqi MiG or an Iraqi Sukhoi getting the bright idea to want to go aloft over the no-fly zone, and then the next thing you know, an American F-15 or an F-16 would fly to intercept. A brief dogfight would ensue, and you know, then the Iraqi MiG would be blown out of the sky. And then other times the Iraqis would do it deliberately as a means to lead American planes into an ambush. You know, like the Iraqis would send up a MiG knowing that they would be on NATO's radar, and they would fly around for a little bit, just long enough to get the attention of an American fighter jet, and then the Iraqi jet would pull away, and of course the American jet would give chase, and the Iraqi jet would be trying to lead the American one right into a surface-to-air missile battery, and, you know, pretty much tell themselves, okay, if I can lure the American close enough, the anti-aircraft fire will bring them down.
So were there one pilot or two pilots in these aircraft now?
Well, it depends on the model of the F-15, really.
Okay.
The base model F-15s, that's the F-15A through the F-15C, those two air superiority planes were single-seat fighters, but then you had the F-15E, which is called the Strike Eagle, and that particular model is a standard two-seater. And I think one of the reasons why it's a two-seater is because it's considered what you call a strike fighter, and that means that it's a plane that can be both a ground attack aircraft and a dogfighter. So it serves those two roles, and you know, because the plane has two roles, you know, you need a guy in the back seat, you know, in order to, you know, take care of the navigation and the weapons employment.
Wow, because this is like a, you know, this is a flying. It's transportation, but it's a weapon. It's a flying weapon.
Right.
And that's what's so, I think, it's the same thing like, you know, a tank is like a rolling weapon, yet human beings are attached to it and in it, you know. So that's the other part, too. When they're building these, you know, and you think about, you know, what started this whole thing about building the F-15, and you're saying like the Russians, I mean, there's, you know, they didn't do very well in their building of it. So there's also like, hey, it's got to be, you know, lightweight enough to really, you know, get speed, and then it's got to be able to, you know, have the the ammunition to take things out, and then at the same time, isn't there a safety protocol that they have to really look at as well, and also maintain through all these years with them? Take a look and make sure these planes are, safe. Have all the safety standards.
It's an interesting thing because I remember when I was growing up that there was all the thing about the space race and that the Russians were going to go and get on the moon first, and then they were going to put a big mirror up and somehow burn us all up in the United States.
If you believe they put a man on the moon.
Yeah, but and my grandfather, even though it was on TV, the launch of rocket ships and all that, never believed that we put a man on the moon. He just no, that didn't happen. So it's interesting how times have changed, and I'm just thinking about, as a kid, I really thought, oh, no, the Russians are going to go to the moon, they're going to put this big mirror up and reflect the sunlight down and burn us all up, because that's what we were kind of brought up with. So, it's interesting because the military obviously keeps things very secret because they have to, but for the person who's not within the military, you really kind of don't know what's really happening sometimes, especially as a kid, because I remember, then we'd go to school and we'd have the air raid drills, and you're like, oh, man, it's those Russians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's what's interesting about this to me. I think I think this whole story of the F-15 goes with space. It really does. It's the same kind of thing that we have with Russia. Oh, should we talk about Russia now? Are we allowed to?
Sure.
You know what I mean? But, yeah, it is interesting, how they build these and that whole tension between the two of us, And then, again, looking at safety. Is it a safe jet, a fighter jet? Do you think?
Well, the F-15 and a lot of American fighters, at least a lot of modern-day ones, I'll say pretty much every fighter jet built from 1960 going forward has a pretty solid record of safety. There's really a lot that goes into maintaining these jets. For every one fighter jet that you have, you'll have a crew of at least half a dozen people who are assigned specifically to that jet to make sure that every nook and cranny is working exactly the way it should. And they've also had the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. If there's any safety issue that's arisen on a particular plane, the Department of Defense has been very quick to jump on it. One notable example that I can give you is with the first generation F-14. It by itself, it was an incredibly safe jet, but what made it a wild card was the underpowered engine that was aboard it. And you had a terribly underpowered Pratt & Whitney engine that was in the first generation F-14, and it was so underpowered to the point where it would induce a lot of mechanical failures. Ooh. And about 30% of the recorded accidents from 1974 until about 1985 were all due to engine failures. So enough of those numbers start to accrue over time, and people say, okay, well, we're losing aviators, and 30% of these accidents are caused by engine failure. We need to make a better engine for this plane.
Yeah.
So that was, the generation of that was the genesis, rather, of the latter day F-14B and F-14D. The stronger versions that had more reliable engines.
When you look at the pictures going through the book, and you've got some incredible footage in here, and I know you also worked with the records from the pilots, right? So your information, you're getting it from the pilots, the pilot sources. But when you look at the picture of it, you've got I'm not good with all the lingo here, but you got the double wing things at the back, right? And
yes.
the telltale part, right? Then you've got the flat wings, but you've got the raised ones, right?
The tail fins.
The tail fins, okay. And then what's crazy? I I would be a baby about getting in one, but I would do it because it looks cool. I would totally get in one and fly in one if I could. But you're like, it's kind of like when you think about going back into the old, even the B model planes, right? The you know what I'm talking about,
right.
those B flyer, when you're way out there, and it's like you're out in the sky, and the plane's behind you, and that's what it looks like to me. And so the actual weapons are underneath it. So that's what the undercarriage and the back plane is mostly for the weapons, right? The bomb thingies. That's not the right term.
Yeah.
The bomb
thingies. I'm looking at them right now, and I'm like, dude, I don't want that to drop on me. Ow. But so that's really, when you look at the design of it, I think it's really sleek. It's pretty amazing. The build of it.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and it is. It has been immensely popular. We've exported it to a lot of allied air forces. Just to name a few, you have the Japanese Air Force, who has their own version of the F-15. You have the Israeli Air Force, South Korean Air Force, even the Saudi Arabian Air Force.
And it looks like it doesn't matter time of day with this, right? No matter what's going on weather-wise, pretty much. Or
Yep.
Yeah.
All weather, day or night.
Wow. Amazing. Some of the there's the one picture I really like. It's the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. You've got this big, looks like a nice monsoon storm being in the desert. That's what, what I know. But that big lightning, and there it is. It's all lit up. This is beautiful. So, how do you get the records to, of the pilots and these images? They're really cool.
Yeah. Well, I have been very blessed to have some contacts in some various public affairs offices, and being that they are government photos, they are technically within the public domain. So there's not a lot of copywriting red tape that's associated with putting those in print, and just the more people I find out there who have lived this, and the more people I find who have experienced the F-15 firsthand, the more of them I find, the more I realize that they're very eager to share their stories, not only for posterity, but to inform the general public that this is what normal, everyday Americans can accomplish when the chips are down and when their country calls upon them for their service.
That's important. I mean, that's and you've been on our show for a few years. You've been on our show a lot, and you know how Nancy and I were like, we don't know about all this stuff, and we were learning so much, through you, and we always talk about that on the show because it's like we don't know. We really, of course there's people out there who really do know, but I know for Nancy and I, we're always learning something that, you just even being here in 29 Palms and seeing what's going on in the skies, and I'm like, okay, what is that? What are you flying up there now? And I wouldn't even think that I wouldn't know what an F-14 or an F-15 was at all. You know what I mean? I'd just go, there's things up there in the sky doing that. You don't know, and I think it's important that we do start to get this knowledge in and understand what our country is built, and the people that are flying them and fighting and risking lives and getting up there in the sky, because it's scary getting up there. I mean, there's so much. When you think about, air travel, you've got the air controllers and all of that, right? So when you're going as a passenger on the, the big planes. And then with this, are they always talking back to a base, like what we would go on a normal plane when they're up there in the sky? Are they always talking to like the air control, and like at a main base place?
Oh yeah. So a lot of the communication traffic that happens up in the air, most of it is going to happen between the other planes that are up there. And if they're not communicating back to a ground-based station, they're communicating with what's called an AWACS, and that's an airborne early warning alert system. And essentially what that is, try to imagine a plane comparable in size to a 707 with a huge radar dish on top of it, and it's flying it's flying a holding pattern essentially several miles away from where all of the fighter jets are, but it's essentially that flying air control terminal, and they are in constant communication with all the other tactical aircraft, not only to serve as a command and control node, but also to alert them of what other enemy planes might be out there. Because one of the things that I loved hearing from the pilots was that, here I am up in the air, and my onboard radar can only see so far, but about 10 to 15 miles behind me is this AWACS plane, and they have a radar that can see, practically 100 miles farther than I can, and they can tell me what's out there, so, I can plan and prepare for it. And they were an incredible asset during Desert Storm.
Wow. And when you think, so they're going up, is there a limit to how many will go together, will fly out like that? Because, when I look at this, I look at these, I feel like the design and then how they're getting out there, it mimics nature. So like I was saying, this kind of looks like a wasp, and then when you think about them all going together, right, it's kind of like the V formation of like the Canadian geese when they fly over kind of thing. So I want to know, I want to hang out with the designers and go, okay, how did you, are you looking at nature and copying that, you know what I mean? So is there like a formation that they would normally fly in, or a number of F-15s that would go out there together?
Right. So planes by design, they are pack animals. Anytime that you have a fighter jet goes up, it never goes up alone. At least they always operate in pairs, and typically what you'll have, depending on what threat you're expecting to see up there in the sky, you can have formations that are either two planes. Sometimes you have a four-plane formation. Other times you can have an eight-plane formation. Really kind of depends on what you're wanting to accomplish on any given day. So aside from the numbers, one of the most common formations that you see is actually a V formation, and that gives the formation a lot of tactical flexibility, because if you're flying in an inverted V formation, it makes it very easy to have one part of the V break right or break left in order to engage or to run interference on an enemy formation, while the other part of the V will circle around to ensure its destruction. And you see the same thing in a lot of our land-based forces. As a matter of fact, I can tell you from personal experience, when I was a tank platoon leader, the most common formation that we used in open terrain maneuvers was what we called the tank wedge. And just try to imagine a flying V on the ground, and that's what a tank wedge is.
Wow, who knew?
Yeah.
Well, so now when birds are flying in a V formation, they're taking the first one that is the head of the V formation, and that's the strongest one in the flock, and then the wingspan is tempering the air a little bit so that the next two don't have to fight as hard as the one in the front, and then the four after that don't have to fly as strongly as the two, and it goes like that. So it's an airstream thing, so that they're lessening what each bird has to do, so the weaker ones are at the back. So it's not like that with planes, right?
No. No. The only thing that's analogous,
I'm sorry, that was a funny question, but
right. Well, the only thing that is analogous to what you just described was at the very front of the formation, at the very apex of the V, is what you call the flight leader, and he's the one who typically occupies that. He's typically the one that occupies that position. Now I can speak from the experience of a tank commander that whenever you have a formation of tanks that's doing a wedge or essentially a flying V that's on the ground, the tank platoon leader will be at the very top of that formation, and to his immediate left will be what's called his wingman tank, and that will be the number 2 tank in his formation, who is commanded by what they say is the second most experienced sergeant in the platoon. So you essentially have a crack tank ace who is covering your flank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Everybody needs someone to cover their flank. I'm just saying.
I think but it's interesting because I do think we get our ideas from nature.
Yeah. Now I wanted to also talk about this because of the way the design of this, the F-15, even the F-14, right? How much I know that it's a fighter jet, so it's there to fight and drop the bombs, right? And I want to talk about the bombs because it's interesting how you've got a photo in here. It's the F-15E Strike Eagle, the 335th Fighter Squadron. He dropped a 2,000-pound joint direct attack munition. These are all big words for me. On a cave in eastern Afghanistan. So they're dropping them, but it's like they're going out in a formation. So there's like a whole physics thing of don't drop there's like a sequence to the bombs dropping, and then I'll get back to my other question. But it seems like they're going at a specific time, and they're going to drop a certain number, right, for what they want to achieve. Yes. Wow, there's 2 planes doing it at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's become a pretty highly choreographed process, and I think it's been made. I think it's been made a lot more efficient now that you have weapons like the JDAMs, which are all precision guided, and it really takes away a lot of the guesswork that our forebears did, back in World War II in Korea, where you just had to drop a bomb and try to let gravity do the work and really hope for the best.
I mean, this is like a dance in the sky,
Yeah.
when you see that. Are they used a lot for surveillance to see what's going on, before, and then it's like, okay, let's go check out and see and to find, like seek and find, and then go, okay, we're going to destroy or not?
Absolutely sure was. As a matter of fact, if we wind the clocks back to about 1995, you have a very similar dynamic happening in the air war over the former Yugoslavia, because for the first 2.5 years of that conflict, it was a lot of observation and a lot of surveillance, and when the actual bombing campaign started, you had the F-15s and F-16s working together as for what was called a buddy lacing team, where essentially you'd have one plane or the other be the eyes and ears for the other plane, and you would adopt this concept of a hunter killer team, whereas one plane would hunt and the other team would kill. So you have one plane that would be the eyes and ears for the other, and it would say, okay, plane 1 sees a target, here's the target description, here's the distance to the target, and then the other plane would say, okay, Roger, I've computed all that information, now I'm delivering the bomb.
Wow.
So, excellent teamwork, and the F-15 and F-16, they were right there on the front lines doing it.
Wow. So now you said F-15 and F-16, so now is that the next one, the next book?
You read my mind. Yes, it sure is. Yeah.
I knew it.
So,
wow.
Yep. Well, just to give you a little preview, the next book in the unofficial fighter series is called Viper Alley, and that is those are true tales of combat from the pilot seat of an F-16.
Wow. So you got Vipers, Wings of Fire, and Tomcats. I'm into the names.
Yeah.
I know we're being girls, but we have to have the names of these jets. So that's amazing, amazing story. So, I know that's the series, but you have other books. I know. What is the very next book?
Okay, so let's see. The very, very next book, as a matter of fact, one that I am completing this month, is called Air War on the Eastern Front, and that is for the Casemate Illustrated series. It's the same series that American Armor in the Pacific is a part of, and that is the Red Air Force versus the Luftwaffe in the skies over Eastern Europe in World War II. And then after that is a book called Days of Fury, which in some ways is a companion piece to an earlier book I did called The Fires of Babylon. And then after that is a book called Danger Forward that's coming out May 15th-ish. And then there's one final book that is on tap for the fall.
Wow.
Mike, how do you do all that? I mean, okay, so I know we've talked about how Nancy and I built the chart of the world around the house once, when I was a kid, and she was writing her novel in Kenya, right, and just before Google. And by the way, the military invented the Internet, just saying. So when you talk about all these things, my mind's like, that's how they know about communication. But do you have
before
your
Al Gore
own...
invented it.
Yeah, Al Gore, that's right. I forgot about that, Do you have your own spreadsheet of wars?
And
do you have your own, Mike Guardia's history of the world? Because it doesn't every time we talk with you, I'm like, no matter what, you have the answer. It doesn't matter if it's a year. You always have it. Do you have your own history of the world going on that you document every time you write a book?
Well, not officially. It's well, I think probably the closest thing that I have to what you just described is just the mountain of books that I have in my library. All of these old volumes that I finished reading years ago, but I just don't have the guts to pitch out.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the hardest thing. Yeah, books are they're your
special.
Babies. Yeah, they're family, and you keep going back to them and everything. But you do cross over the same wars, so one war pretty well, or this war. You know what I mean? Don't you become familiar with each circumstance? Yeah, interesting, man. I know we'll be talking with you soon. We still have to talk about Hal Moore since we went to his museum in Bardstown, Kentucky. So we still got that on the list, and our Love Your Parks tour. You sent us on our Footsteps in the Generals. Follow the footsteps of the generals, and I think we're in Patton Land, and that crosses into your tank history, right? Where we are, on the Mojave.
Oh, sure does.
Yeah. So we got planes. Well, I should say fighter jets, and we got tanks. So, last question here: if we're in 29 Palms and all this stuff is going on in the sky. So the F-15 and the F-14, this is more Air Force. So what would be up here if they're Marines? What are they doing? Do you know what? I want to know what planes they're. Do they have their own fighter jets?
Right.
That are different?
Absolutely, they do.
Oh.
Yeah. So the primary fighter jet for the Marines right now is the F-18, and then they also have a plane called the Harrier, and the Harrier jet is unique in the sense that it's actually a vertical takeoff plane. It has these thrusters that they can adjust, and they can take off. They can take off from any platform straight up vertically in the same manner that a helicopter would. Yeah. So they don't need to, they don't need to have a mile-long runway to get in and out of any kind of landing zone.
Wow.
See, and so in nature
space.
there's a Harrier Hawk, and I don't know if the Harrier Hawk, if the plane was named after the Harrier Hawk, who has that same ability, or the Hawk was named after the aircraft. But there's also, hummingbirds can go straight up.
Yeah, they've got that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so Mike, our next show is nature versus the military and military versus nature. We'll just do it. Birds and planes. Well, that's it's interesting. When we were in Yuma, Arizona, we were at the Yuma Bird Nature and History Festival, and Yvonne Peach, who has the Coronado Motor Hotel there, she's our tour headquarters there. When we go there, she has a Yuma Historical Society of Tourism and Aviation History, because aviation history over in Yuma is huge, and her festival, the Bird and Nature and History Festival, is because we're like, well, the bird wings and, aviation, it's all connected. We all wanted to be birds up there, so, it is connected. So it would be cool to do that, though, see if we can kind of map that out between, the designers of the aircraft and what nature, because I know they've got to look to nature for inspiration, how a bird does something. How do they make that? That's incredible, though, to be able to go right up like that. Do you think that's part of how we know how to do rockets and go up to space? Is from that jet?
That's a different design, though.
Yeah, but you're still going straight up, right? So
right. Well, the development of rockets actually preceded the Harrier. I want to say by 20, 25 years or so.
Wow.
But interesting thing about how our rocket technology really took off was that a lot of the pioneering rocketeers, if you will, here in America were actually captured Nazi scientists.
Yo.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of a lot of some of the best and most brilliant minds in the field of rocket science were actually German, and they were essentially German. They were German prisoners of war, and we brought them over here to the States, and in places like New Mexico, and kept them under surprisingly liberal conditions with very minimum security, and they said, okay, well, the war's over, you lost, so now we're going to pick your brains, and you're going to help us build our own rocket technology. And then they pulled out a map of the world, and they said, okay, Germany's here, you're here, and if you try and escape, it's a 3-day walk in the desert in any direction, and if you don't die from dehydration, then the coyotes are certainly going to get you, so please don't think about escaping.
Wow. So this is where all because we had all these POW camps, right, all over the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Yuma out here, so when you think about like White Sands, look at Los Alamos. That's some crazy stuff there, right, with the atomic bombs and everything. So that's some crazy stuff we did. So we're part of because I know they had Germans and they had Italians, and I think I could swear there were some Russians in there somewhere, and maybe that's how they ended up in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
okay. The Germans, just put them on the Hitler side, and then I don't believe that the Italians were part of the Hitler side.
Yeah, but we had Italian prisoner wars, POW camps out here. The Italians were in there. All around Yuma and Phoenix area, there was POWs with Italians in there.
Yeah, they were part of the Axis.
Yeah. No, this is...
Yeah, they were part of the Axis fighting for Mussolini.
Yeah, Mussolini.
Wow, and he was crazy, man. He was a crazy dude. He was terrible. Wow. Well, who knew we were going to talk about, F-15s into Mussolini and POW camps out in the desert? But, oh, my gosh, So you kept it there. The German, was this in White Sands mostly when you talk about New Mexico?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we get there, we'll be calling you.
It was at White Sands and Los Alamos, and
yeah, Los Alamos up. Yeah, so we had the Manhattan Project. Whoa, wow. Well, thanks for joining us, Mike. It's like my brain is
thank you for having me.
Now. Yeah, good history lesson. We always appreciate
a pleasure.
them. Really, really good stuff. Everyone, again, the book is Wings of Fire, A Combat History of the F-15 on Amazon, all those great places. I encourage you to go to Mike's website as well, MikeGuardia.com. You can listen to his interviews on NationalParkTraveling.com, where we talk about the general history, the history of the generals, like Captain Fremont and people that we find historically as we travel the country, and also on BlendRadioandTV.com. We do interviews with all his new books as well. And we want to thank everyone for joining us here on Big Blend Radio. Just go to BigBlendRadio.com. Our episodes air Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, except for holidays. And we're going to close the show. I love this. I'm so stoked that we get to play this. Wings of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we get to match a song to the book title, like
That's
really.
Awesome.
And here's the fun part of this. It's guitarist Misha Schellhaus, and yes, he's German, but one of the best guitarists, really. And what's fun about it is he actually lives here in 29 Palms. So how about that? Yeah, he's got Airbnbs out in the desert and Joshua Tree and this area. When we first connected with him was quite a few years ago, and he was out in Venice Beach. But yeah, he's lived all over the place and traveled all over the place. So anyway, Wings of Fire is the title of his first solo EP. And so we get to play it now in honor of Mike's new book. So here it is, Wings of Fire. You can keep up with Misha at MishaMusic.com. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be on the show, ladies.
You take care.
Take care.